I've recently seen a lot of 100-day challenges in Minecraft, and it got me wondering, how much could you actually do if, well, you weren't a particularly good builder? Most of these challenges are done on a bare seed starting from nothing, but I wanted to try it on my 3-year-old server, and that's what we're doing today. Before we get down to work, I need to address the obvious. Counting days in the traditional method wasn't going to work since people are hopping off and on the server all the time, which would totally screw things up. So I simply set a timer for 20 minutes, and every time it went off, we came one day closer to the end. So without further ado, let the 33 hours begin now. I started day 1 by finishing up a project that I'd been working on when I decided to do the 100-day challenge, a railroad around spawn. All I had left to do was to finish draining the inside of the glass underwater tube section. I tried to add a drop so that the railway would connect, and it ended up not looking super great, but it was the best that I could do at the moment, and since I couldn't think of a better option, I left it at that. If you have any ideas on how to blend it or any suggestions for any other builds, please let me know because I'm trying to learn and I could really use some tips. Plus, with it being a server, it's definitely something that I could improve down the road. Day 2 began with someone else sleeping through the server's night, making me lose half of my first day, and it was here where I realized that I was going to have to use the 20-minute timer method for the remaining 99 days. I went back to my base to look for some more rails, only to find that I had been pickled, but that challenge that was going around the server would have to be addressed on a later date.
Why are you in on it?
I completed laying the rails on the underwater portion and took a ride around spawn on the railway for the first time. I thought it'd be funny to get some cows on there consistently riding the railway, which it was, except tragically they would end up taking damage clipping around some corners, so they ended up dying without me realizing. The rest of day 2 was spent decorating the enchantment room inside my castle. I found that having glass panes floating in the sky looked like enchantment table letters, which gives off this really cool aesthetic when you're looking at the setup. On day 3, I decided to read the rules of the pickle game that had been started. Essentially, it's hide and seek where someone hides a pickle in a frame in someone else's base, and they have 1 week to find it. Once you find it, you then proceed to pickle someone else. After figuring out the rules, I completely ignored it for the time being and went back to add some emeralds and barrels to the enchantment room as decorations. After that, I got to work cleaning up my potion room a bit, just making it a bit more organized and less bare. I tried making some sort of light fixture, but as I said, I'm not great at building, so this had to make do. I started out day 4 by making some soul sand elevators in my castle, which were much needed since previously I just had water dumped on the floor. After that, I went to work on the poor man's excuse for a furnace room, and for now, I rounded out the lingering projects that had remained unfinished on the server. And on day 5, I began working on my first real project of the 100 days. I had always wanted to build something in the Nether, and it's a place that the majority of Minecraft players never do anything with. But let's be realistic, one of the big reasons for that is because the Nether is so stinking ugly. I decided that I wanted to turn part of the area near the portal into a small little village type place, but I wanted to use grass as the base so that the way the entire area wasn't just red. I began the project by upgrading some of my tools with mending, which would come in super handy later on. Then I hopped into the Nether to begin collecting materials. I grabbed a whole bunch of wood and other materials that I could use, that way the buildings would still remain Nether themed. On day 8, the building process actually began. I started by making a building themed around the blue warped wood. I then added some dark accents with the Nether brick and blackstone. I also began to realize that the reason that no one builds in the Nether wasn't because of the way that it looks, but rather because of the mobs. Ghast were constantly trying to blow up my progress, and piglins for whatever reason wanted to walk right where I was trying to build. And that's not even to mention the fact that zombie piglins apparently target any sort of door and will break it, so doors on these buildings became out of the question. On day 9, I went to work on the second building in the little village, which I wanted to make somewhat stick out of the side of the hill that was in the area. I laid a blackstone floor and then made the walls out of quartz and iron. Some members of the local HOA weren't happy with my land development, but they were dealt with. All in all, the structure of the house looked pretty good. I made the roof to the house on day 11 using diorite since it was much easier to come by than quartz, and added a nice texture difference to give the house a nice change of pace on the inside. I finished up by throwing some glowstone in the corners, and then while throwing some lava in the furnaces to smelt some nether bricks, I made a catastrophic mistake and hotkeyed my crossbow straight into the furnace. On day 12, I came back to the overworld to grab a whole bunch of grass and dirt so I could do some terraforming in the area where I was working. I then traded with my villager to repair some tools, and on day 13, I began laying the grass around my buildings. The reason that I decided to do this, not just stick with the netherrack, was because the green grass would give me a nice strong contrast from the barren red landscape, and really highlight the area that I was working in. That, and it would also distract from my lack of talent in the actual building department. Then I went back to the overworld to get some more dirt, forgot to log off, and when I finished recording for the time being, I got put in a box by another member of the server. I did some more landscaping, performed some casual child murder, and then spent day 15 tearing down the many pillars that had been used to climb up from the village area back up to the portal. On day 16, I came back to the overworld and did some deforestation in order to get some saplings for the bare areas of the Nether. I also threw some bone meal down to grow some grass, and the landscape started to actually look pretty decent. On day 17, I began construction of the final building in the village area. I used dark oak wood around the sides and some purple wood as the roof, and by the end it looked absolutely horrendous. Although it didn't turn out super well, this was the first time that I tried to start something from absolute scratch, and I know that I'll slowly fix it up over time, but for now, at least I have a base to move forward with. Luckily, the rest of the builds in this 100 day actually turned out amazing. Like, seriously, this is as bad as it gets. On day 18, I came back to the overworld, fed my cows, and made a path from one of the train stations to a nearby village, and then through a swamp to a dock that led to another member's base, officially connecting it to spawn. I rounded out the day by grabbing some cobbled deep slate and then beginning to work on a building that I had made in the village. I had done work on the village before, and this was the final building that I had left to complete. One of the aspects that I absolutely love the most about this 100 day challenge is how much it's forcing me to finish projects that I had started some over a year ago. The railway, my castle, and now this village are all prime examples, with some projects having been previously abandoned well over a year ago. After finishing the building on day 21, I used jack-o'-lanterns and moss carpet to light up the pathway that I'd previously marked out. Then I repaired my pickaxe and prepared to make what would become my favorite building on the entire server. On the server, there are 3 main regions where different players have their bases, and right in the center of all 3 is this beautiful, naturally generated mountain that pierces the sky. I really wanted to make something there, and I decided to create a temple that would become a memorial to the server. Days 22 through 24 were spent preparing for the build, gathering materials, creating a railway system to the mountain to help transfer materials, and then actually sending everything that we needed over to the mountain. And after some minor technical difficulties, myself, along with the help of Twisty, began construction on a new temple. Day 25 started off with some more terraforming, flattening off enough of the mountain in order to have an even surface to build on. I then marked off some of the sections of the buildings, and after some quick design brainstorming, we each began on our own sections. I started by digging out a recessed area to fill with black concrete and glass to give a reflective floor type look, and Twisty began by making the base structure for the 2 open pillared areas on the sides. Progress moves so much quicker with 2 people working on the same project, with the only interferences coming when creepers decided to sneak up on you during the moment you go AFK.
Yep.
Watch out, there's a creeper there.
I designed a floor under the pillar area to give it some more accent, which of course was interrupted by a suicide bomber.
Oh my gosh.
After some more tweaking and some more bombings, I settled on a design that I was happy with. I decided to throw some symbols on the floor for an added effect, and then moved on to adding accents to the pillared areas. Twisty had the great idea of putting up displays on the inside of the main building for the 4 most consistent players and other major events, and as he worked on those, I continued to focus on the details of the other areas around. As we continued to work, we moved on from the larger structures to the finer detailed section. I decided to lay carpet over the symbols, making them much more subtle while still letting the glowstone be able to shine through, giving them this great effect when you turn on shaders. Twisty continued to work on the displays while I moved on to the roof, using a layer of glass and then some glowstone to add some depth, which paired with the floor really drew you into the main area. I then used white concrete to seal off the roof, and then Twisty and I took a night to hunt skeletons for white dye and bone meal. We then placed gems in the crown of the temple, with one representing each of the 4 main players. With the temple pretty near done, we then dug out 4 tunnels that would lead to an elevator that would bring people up to the temple. The 4 tunnels each pointed towards the 4 main players' bases. It may seem like I'm mentioning the point of the 4 players very often, but it's less about those 4 and more about the fact that every aspect and detail of the temple has a specific purpose beyond function, which to me is really cool, since in a sense it adds life to the building. To add to that, each display was more than just a representation of a player or of an event. The armor used in my and in Snazzy Guy's displays was the armor that was actually stolen that caused a war on the server. On day 48, we completed the final touches by adding the dragon egg from when the server killed the dragon, and the sacred dirt, which was the first block ever broken on the server. Day 49, we cleaned up, and at the halfway mark, we completed what is to date the coolest thing that I've ever built on the server. I spent day 51 trying to organize the leftover materials from the temple build, repopulating my cows, repairing my tools yet again, and renovating the trading hall floor because I'm rich. On day 52, I decided to head out to a frozen ocean that was semi-nearby. I used the ice to create a quicker way of travel in the Nether to get to the end portal, which had been far enough away to be a huge nuisance when trying to walk. I then traded some gold, replanted some trees in the Nether, murdered some of the locals, and filled a chest full of boats for people to use for Nether transport. My next project began on day 54. Previously on the server, we we had used a gold farm for XP grinding since it was the most OP way to do so when we built it. But the 1.19 update absolutely nerfed it, so we needed the new options, so I decided to build an Enderman farm. It was about time I contributed a farm to the server anyway, so it was honestly just as much of an obligation as a need. I began by collecting the materials that I would need. One of the things that I realized about the 100-day challenge was the amount of time that I would spend gathering materials, organizing, or simply running around. It takes up so much time to the point that I would estimate that roughly 50 to 100 days were actually spent running from place to place gathering materials. But as day 54 began to wind down, I transferred everything to the end, and in the final moments of day 54, I entered the end, and I found that an Enderman farm had already been built. Overcome with grief, I made a staircase out of the end platform and began day 55 with some more slaughtering of local wildlife. After I had enough carcasses to sell on the black market, I decided to check out the farm. I threw all my armor in an ender chest just as a backup in case something weird happened and I fell into the void, and then I headed down to check it out. It was about as basic of an ender farm as you can get, and even though the one I was going to make would have been much more efficient, this one would have to do. So I headed back, grabbed my armor, and headed back into the overworld to contemplate my life decisions. Also, I found out that if skeletons try to shoot you through the portal, the arrows are actually teleported into the next dimension, so that's pretty cool. I then decided it was finally time to complete the pickle challenge. As I mentioned, I only had a week to find it, and with all the other time that I'd spent working on the other project, I'd come upon my final day. If I didn't find it today, I would have to pay a fee to the one who hid the pickle in my base.
It's not under the carpet because those aren't see-through. Nice. I got it!
As you could tell by the excitement in my voice, I totally hadn't lost all joy in pursuit of the pickle, but now that I found it, my job was to pickle someone else, and I had the perfect person in mind. Scrub Master. Now, I'm sure 99.9% of you don't know and probably don't care who he is, but in short, he's the one who sabotaged myself and Snazzy Guy in a war that had happened on the server long ago. It was one that I'd spent weeks preparing for, and because of him, so much hard work was wasted in a moment, so I had to get him back. His base is rather large, so I decided to hide it somewhere in the upper region, which is actually much harder than it looked because it wasn't quite as detailed as I was anticipating, which made it much harder to find a hiding spot. But as I was looking, I found one of the rarest mob spawns possible.
Oh, no way! I need a name tag. Oh my gosh! I need a name tag or a boat. Come with me. Come with me. And it's fully enchanted. Wait, do you have a name? He doesn't. Oh my goodness. Dude. Michael, please have wood. I will take apart your house if I need to. Oh, I can't use that wood. I don't want to... Yes. Come on. Come on. Yes! Dude. Oh, that's insane.
After taking a quick detour to grab a name tag, I settled on a place to hide the pickle. And if you're thinking, Phil Super, he's gonna watch this video and know, well, don't worry, because it's been weeks since I hit it, so if he hasn't found it by now, that means that he owes me some diamonds. On day 61, I began my next little project to get a whole bunch of Power 5 bows for an event that was gonna happen later on. I started by using one of the members' sugarcane farms, a membership that I paid for to trade for more levels and emeralds, and then I bought a whole bunch of power, unbreaking, and infinity books for the bows that I was going to enchant. After a lot of running around and trading, I was ready to head back to the already built Enderman farm to enchant everything. I grabbed my first set of books and hopped down to begin enchanting. Unfortunately, like the big brain I am, I forgot to bring down a crafting table so that way I could make an anvil, so I had to run all the way back just to grab some wood, which turned out to be the least of my problems. This is exactly why I take my armor off. Stupid moves like this. After contemplating my purpose in life yet again, I poured myself a cup of coffee and went back to work. I traded for more emeralds to get some more tools and trade for more books and went back to more enchanting. Or that was the plan, but I forgot the crafting table again. Eventually, I got my act together and everything got enchanted. On day 65, I headed to one of the Nether fortresses that had been a bit cleared out so that way I could get some wither skulls. But after spending an entire day there without getting a single skull despite having looting 3 on my sword, I decided not to waste any more time and move on to building again. Day 66 began with me moving a transport railroad out of the spawn area in order to not have something ugly sticking out. now. Then I made a few random beacons leading from the spawn area to the other bases. I decided to do this instead of making a path because the distance was pretty large in comparison to some of the other areas I'd made paths for previously. So I decided to make these kind of beacons as markers to know where you were on your journey between the lands. The fun part about making these was that I decided to make them completely out of materials that I already had laying around, which was a fun little challenge. I also realized why I had so many of the orange type of block lying around. It's because they're stinking ugly. But after some tinkering and slaughtering some immigrants, I settled on a design that I was content with. They do look pretty cool when you see one in the distance at night though, so despite the simplicity of it all, it really worked out well. I then collected a whole bunch of birch wood with the idea in mind to attempt to go back and make a tree at the temple. The center courtyard had been lacking something and I felt like this would be a perfect addition. I used the birch as a base and a random assortment of white blocks and leaves. I tried adding some glass as accents, but I have to admit that I'm not very good when it comes to making a tree from scratch, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to hire out Scrub Master in order to build one better for me. Despite the awkwardness of the tree, the floating glass that I added did look pretty cool to me, and the diamonds were a nice touch in theory, but in practice I think I made them look a bit weird. But this was a big reason why I was doing the 100-day challenge. I wanted to try to push myself to build things that I'd never attempted to before. At this point I realized that the cows that I first had tried to get on the railroad were dead, so I came back to spawn to give it another shot. It was so much more of a pain than I expected and ended up taking half a day just to get them on, and even now I have no idea if they're all going in the same direction or if they're dead. So after giving the final one his name, I sent them off and proceeded to ignore the idea that any possible issues could arise. Day 68 was spent trading emeralds, slaughtering local wildlife, and doing some more trading so I can get myself the tools that I may or may not have lost while falling into the void. On the nicest day of the entire challenge, I made monuments on other members' bases, and that's all I did that day. On day 70, I began to destroy the polar ice cap so I could build myself something that I'd always wanted to build, a racetrack, because nothing says I love the environment more than eliminating icebergs and replacing them with combustion engines. I decided to make the track in a nearby desert for two main reasons. One is that it's right next to the ice caps, which makes sense, a hot desert next to a frozen ocean, of course. Secondly, and almost more importantly, the desert was already super flat, so the amount of terraforming would be a minimum, or so I thought. After spending a few days laying out the track, I hopped over to the gold farm to grab as much gold as possible to line the outside of the track. I started by making bumpers only along the turns to try to keep the barriers down to a minimum. I didn't want them to clutter up the edges of the track, but after some testing, I found out a couple things. One is that it's way too hard to stay on the track just in general without some sort of safety, and secondly is that barriers don't actually stop you, but they bounce you. I then decided to go with blocks along the edge of the track at the same Y level, so that way they would be sticky enough to keep you from flying off, but also wouldn't bounce you off the opposite edge, and the system seemed to work. From there, I grabbed some glowstone, committed some more manslaughter, and lit up the underside of the track. Added some more lighting around the sides, and it did a really good job of lighting up the track well. I then took one quick night test drive around the track, and on the next day, I began the long process of decoration. I started by making a finish line out of blue packed ice, and then an archway out of some leftover gold. It was the first part of the track that made it look like the placement was intentional and not just some ice slapped down on a random desert. I spent the next night lighting up the area around to minimize the number of mobs that could spawn, because after working in the Nether, I knew how dreadfully annoying it could be if I didn't address it. I then came back to spawn to do some deforestation and excavated a boatload of nearby dirt. Then I came back and began laying the dirt. It was at this point that I came to realize that the vision that I had would probably take until day 100 to complete. So I got to work and spent the next 10 days laying all the dirt and terraforming all around the track. Once some sections began to finish being filled with dirt, I planted saplings to grow trees so that way I could chop them down, get more saplings, and repeat until the landscape was filled with vegetation. On day 82, I grabbed a bunch of stone and deep slate and began terraforming one section of the track into a cave tunnel. My big plan was to turn land sections of the track into different biomes, with caves, jungles, spruce forests, and so on. Once I finished the cave structure, I decorated the inside with different ores to give it some more life, and on day 86, I came back to spawn to grab a whole bunch of glowstone from a witch farm, and I attempted to find a coral reef that I thought was in the area, but I couldn't find it for the life of me, so a day ended up being pretty much wasted. I did end up grabbing some bamboo on the journey, so it wasn't a complete loss though. I continued to chop trees and add to the amount of plant life in the area so it filled in completely. I then used jack-o'-lanterns and moss carpet to add some subtle lighting that really helped give the track a nice glow. In the cave section I used lanterns, which I feel fit the look much better. I made a little monument in the desert section to give it a little more life, and then I decided that all the gold and iron that I'd placed around the land sections looked stupid, so I ripped it all up to replace it with grass, which blended much better. On day 92, I found out where a coral reef was from some other members on the server, so I headed over there to destroy the tropical fish's only habitat so that way I could make a combustion-powered racetrack look pretty. I also found out that shroom lights and even glowstone work really well when placed in trees for lighting. I thought that they would look weird, but they actually look quite natural, especially the shroom light. On day 96, I made a decision that would make me feel like the 100-day mark was looming closer than it ever had before. You see, the track was mostly flat and the inside looked good, but as you went along, you could see outside into the other biomes around, which were a bare desert, an ocean, and a plains biome. So in order to drastically increase the immersion, I pulled a page from the Disneyland Bible and created a berm all along the outer edge of the land sections of the track, which made a huge difference. Day 97 was spent adding more details with bone meal. I set a time trial lap and repaired my tools one final time. Day 98 I spent finishing up the final touches on the track, decorating the nether path to the portal, and making payments to the players that I owed. When day 99 came, I didn't build, but instead I went everywhere that I had worked for the past 33 hours on this server. I got to enjoy the railroad in its complete loop, to see the nether transformed, a beautiful temple, fun little beacons, and a complete racetrack. When I started this series, I had no idea what all I would accomplish. Heck, honestly, I didn't even have plans beyond finishing the railroad and the nether. I got to push myself, and more importantly, to commit to seeing projects through. And the results are why I continue to pay to keep the server running. A server like this isn't only successful if people are consistently online, but it's successful because whenever you get that feeling to hop on and play Minecraft, it's there. Things on the server change slowly, but the world we have has grown so much and continues to grow. I can't wait to see where it goes next. 99 days down and only one to go. That one will have to wait.